Welcome to Shot Recap, and this is the movie The Convert. 1830. During a violent storm, one of the crew members aboard a British ship perished. Reverend Thomas Munro said a prayer, and the body was cast overboard. These sailors are desperate men settlers who believe they can make a fortune in unknown lands, all except for Wainuku, the son of a Maori chief. The father pays the captain to teach him navigation. The British have landed on the shores of New Zealand. They need to find timber to repair the ship after the storm. Munro has brought his white horse with him. Wainuku wears a whale tooth around his neck, and the tattoo on his face tells the story of his life up to this point. A priest spots a young Maori girl approaching him with a knife. She hid the weapon and gently stroked the horse. Her fellow tribesmen emerged from the bushes behind her. Munro got frightened. Fortunately, the British arrived just in time. The captain apologized for the intrusion and asked for timber. In exchange for the trees, the warrior demanded the horse. The sailor also handed over his axe to help the locals work faster. The priest asked the captain for permission to spend the night here, on the shore, rather than returning to the ship. Only then did the man realize that Wainuku had disappeared. Munro decided to rest under a tree. Suddenly, he heard shouting and the sounds of a struggle. Not far away, two Maori tribes were fighting. The Englishman managed to save the girl he had met earlier in the forest. Standing before him was Wainuku, now dressed in traditional attire, along with his father, Chief Tioreore. Munro pleaded for mercy for the girl and her husband. The Englishman was risking his own life. Fortunately, the captain arrived just in time once again. He told the chief that this man was his cargo and that he must deliver him to the town of Epworth aboard his ship. Munro still hoped to save the couple and offered his horse in exchange for their lives. The chief agreed to trade only one life for the horse. The Maori made the decision for the Englishman and slit the man's throat. The chief told the girl to leave before he ate her. Munro brought Rangjamai aboard the ship, which caused problems with the superstitious sailors. Having a woman on board was considered bad luck. The priest had to hide her in his cabin until they arrived in Epworth. Munro hoped the girl would be safe there. At the house, Rangjamai mourned her husband and began cutting herself in grief. A church had already been built in the town, and they were just waiting for the priest to arrive. But Munro was more concerned about Rangjamai's condition. Her wounds had caused her to develop a fever. The settlement's mayor invited the priest to dinner. This land was being leased from a local chief named Maioha. The British got along well with him, but there was another chief, Tioreore. He had been attacking neighboring tribes and seizing their lands. Munro asked the local doctor to help the injured girl, but the doctor refused to waste medicine on her. So the priest had to turn to a healer, an old woman who treated the poor and the native people. Charlotte applied a poultice to fight the infection and prayed in the Maori language. Rangjamai began to recover. Suddenly, a boy rang the bell, and all the colonists grabbed their weapons. Maori warriors were approaching the town, armed with muskets. Rangjamai let out a sorrowful cry and stepped forward to meet the tribal chief. Maioha was her father. The girl demanded justice to avenge her slain husband. They managed to capture 3 enemy warriors. The men were forced to kneel before the grieving widow. Her husband's killer wasn't among them, but the chief executed all 3 captives, one by one. Munro tried to stop the killings, but Charlotte held him back. She told the chief that this priest had saved his daughter. The chief decided that Rangjamai would stay in the town and that she would study under Munro. To ensure her protection, Maioha also left a young warrior named Pahirua in town. The settlers weren't pleased about their new neighbors. Both Rangjamai and Pahirua were to assist Munro at the church. Regardless of tensions, the priest had to carry out his duties. Pahirua had his eye on a young English girl, and the feeling was mutual. The town had only been established a year ago. The owner of the general store deeply regretted ending up in this backwater. He had been promised wealth, almost a paradise on earth. Now, everything he earned, he was saving for the journey back home. The colonists resented seeing savages inside the house of God, claiming that pagans didn't belong there. That evening, Mr. Patchword's daughter came to Pahirua. They had fallen in love. There was a dance held in town. Mr. Patchword noticed his daughter had slipped away. Rangjamai, on the other hand, was eager to attend the celebration. Charlotte even sewed a dress for her. When Rangjamai entered the hall, everyone turned to stare. The Englishmen made no effort to hide their irritation. When his daughter returned, returned, Mr. Patchword asked two men to come with him somewhere. On her way home, Rangamai suddenly broke into tears. On the church floor lay Paharua dead. His skull had been crushed. Munro demanded that a magistrate be summoned to bring the killers to justice. These fools didn't understand that the young man was under their protection. The next morning, the mayor told the priest they had already found the culprit. The townspeople had beaten up the shopkeeper Badgett and blamed him for everything. The half-alive Badgett was locked up in a house. The poor man would later be tried in Australia. Pahirua's beloved came to say goodbye to the young warrior. The priest allowed her to approach the body. The girl gave Munro her horse so he could take Pahirua's body back to his tribe. Charlotte and Rangamai would accompany him. The mayor informed the priest that Badgett had hanged himself, and only the guilty do that. But Munro remembered that Badgett was a devout Catholic. He wouldn't have condemned his soul to eternal damnation. The English hoped the priest would cover for them and tell Mayanui that the culprit had been punished, since they paid for his relocation and built a church for him. But Munro refused to protect the murderers. Charlotte revealed that she had been married to a Māori warrior, but after he died in battle, she was cast out of the tribe. Finally, their long journey ended as they approached the settlement. The tribe immediately began mourning the loss. Mayanui forgave the priest because he saved his daughter. But what should he do with the other residents of Epworth? Who should be killed? The priest suggested raising the rent for the English settlers instead. Munro observed the life and customs of the Maori tribe. He made sketches in his notebook. In the distance, gunshots were heard, and Munro ran to see what had happened. The warriors were learning to shoot British flintlock muskets. The priest showed them how to reload faster, then hit the target with precision. Meanwhile, the elder ordered his men to bring him the foreigner's notebook. Besides the portrait in Maori style, he saw drawings of various atrocities. Because of this, the chief summoned Munro that evening. He suspected the priest was hiding something. Munro had to admit that he had been a soldier in the British Army. During an attack on an enemy position, he was ordered to kill all enemies. But in the thick fog, it wasn't soldiers who were hiding. It was women and children. In the heat of the moment, they slaughtered everyone with sabers and only afterward realized what they had done. After that incident, Munro left the army, took holy orders, and began wandering the world. But the chief didn't share Munro's remorse. He had also killed women and children. That didn't matter. What mattered was who would win. The priest spent that night with Charlotte. She had been exiled here from Liverpool for stealing food. English sailors decided to attack the Maori. In retaliation, Mayanui killed both the sailors and the prisoners, and then they all were eaten. Charlotte was spared only because she saved the chief's brother during the fight. The next morning, Munro saw a familiar captain arrive. He had brought a new shipment of muskets. The cunning trader was asking 600 pounds of flax and 200 bushels of potatoes per musket, although last time he had only asked for potatoes. The captain was selling muskets to both warring sides. Munro asked Mayanui to negotiate with the enemy chief. After all, that was exactly what the British wanted once the Maori wiped each other out. The colonists could easily take their land. Mayanui allowed the European to speak with Akatarewa. If the enemy accepted peace, so would he. Thus, Munro found himself back on the familiar ship. He despised the captain, who profited from others' deaths. It turned out Rangamai had also secretly sneaked onto the ship. Munro forbade her from going ashore. They were greeted by Wainuku, who led the priest to his father. Rangamai went down into the hold to fetch a musket, but then was drawn to some pistols. The chief's hut was draped with the heads of his enemies, and Akatarewa was wearing a British uniform. Munro delivered gifts from Mayanui and proposed a peace treaty between the tribes. Only by making peace could the Maori stand against the white men. Munro tried to reason with Akatarewa, but the bloodthirsty chief refused to listen. Wainuku advised the Englishman to go check on his horse. Meanwhile, the captain was waiting for payment, 15 pigs or 200 baskets of potatoes per musket. But Akatarewa shot the sailor with his own weapon and coldly executed the rest of the crew. The tribe's strongest warrior attacked Munro, but Rangamai saved him, killing the Maori who had taken her husband's life. Other warriors loyal to Akatarewa boarded the ship and finished off the remaining crew. The captain had boasted that there were many more muskets aboard. Rangamai and Munro returned to their home settlement. The priest warned Mayanui that the English ship could quickly bring more enemy warriors, and it carried cannons. The elder raised his hand in a symbolic gesture, accepting the Europeans into his tribe. Maianui's warriors were preparing for a massive battle. Now it became clear why Tioreore had needed his sailor son. He had planned to seize the British ship from the beginning. His army sailed toward the shores of Nakanui. Tioreore rallied his warriors with a battle chant. But first, they bombarded the settlement with cannon fire. The front lines on both sides were decimated by musket volleys. The attackers reached the huts. Maianui's warriors created a smokescreen to neutralize the enemy's advantage in ranged weapons. They killed their foes using axes, clubs, and spears. Both men and women fought in the battle. Munro organized the rear defense. He reloaded muskets and pistols with impressive speed. Tragically, Charlotte was fatally wounded and died in Munro's arms. Meanwhile, Maianui's best swimmers managed to seize the ship. He emerged victorious, and Wainuku was forced to flee in shame. The young man, wounded, collapsed by the shore. His father stayed by his side, and Tioreore knelt down and handed Maianui a club so he could do what had to be done. The chief showed him respect and executed the conqueror. Now it was time to decide Wainuku's fate. Maianui extended his hand and offered peace at last. He would marry Rangimai so that their tribes could be united once more. Afterward, the chief threw the club into the sea. 4 years passed. Wainuku and his wife met with a representative of the British Crown. The monarch planned to impose duties on all goods the tribes traded with the British. Munro put the British in their place. If the king wanted to establish a customs post here, he would have to pay rent for the land. That was Beyond the Edge. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next shot recap.